These stories are first-hand accounts shared by Reddit users, detailing unsettling real-life encounters that left lasting impressions. Each narrative provides a chilling glimpse into moments of danger, survival, and eerie coincidences that might make you rethink your surroundings. Disclaimer: these accounts were originally published by Reddit users and are presented as personal experiences. While they are described as true events, their accuracy relies on the original storytellers. The details shared here are intended for awareness and cautionary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. Story 1. Let's not meet again, Montana hunters. So, my wife and I backpack/hike a lot. The more remote the place, the better. In 2015, my wife and I were in the Bitterroot Wilderness in Montana. We had been out for 2 weeks on a 100-mile route finding trail. We kind of connected together on a few topo maps to make a loop. We had only seen one other person, Tom. We met him on our second day in and his last day out. He told us he hadn't seen or ran into anyone out there, so as far as we all knew, we were going to be alone out there. He told us hunting season was weeks away, but there might be scouts out. To be very careful with our food, where we eat and are sent because it's bear country, and he had seen a few and even one with cubs. He also mentioned that he had heard a cougar in the distance, but that we should be okay as long as we stick together. We camped together that night, and the next morning we thanked him for his company, all the info, and parted ways. For 2 weeks we hiked, saw some cool vistas, swam, saw and heard wildlife, and all the stuff you'd expect to see in the backcountry. We didn't really think about Tom again after a few days out and hadn't seen anyone. We took the thought of being alone for granted and let our guard down. As far as other people were concerned, we were all alone out there. We are in our last few days out, winding the trip down, sauntering back to the trailhead, just taking it all in. We find a nice flat tent site, make a fire, some dinner, hang our food bag and walk back to our tent for the night and pass a good night's sleep. The next morning, as backpackers do, we break camp as early as possible to get some breakfast and coffee into us, but before we leave camp I need to drop a dude. So I venture away from the tent site to find a suitable spot. As I'm walking around to find a place to dig my cat hole, I come up on a lumped-up thing looking like a bush. I was not expecting to run into anyone out there, as we had only seen one other person early on and no one else since. I wasn't paying attention, as I'm looking for somewhere to shit and not looking out for people. These two are in a camo blind type of wrap. I didn't realize that they were there, and they didn't hear or realize that I walked up on them till the last damn minute when I was right on top of them, tripping over one of their legs. They scared the shit out of me, and I scared the shit out of them. When I hit the guy's leg, I startled him. He kind of jumped up, knocking their blind off for the big reveal. The guy that was on his knees has a dick in hand, apparently blowing the other guy that is up against the tree. Now the guy on his knees is looking at me dead in the eyes with a look of, "W, who are you? Fuck. I'm caught." My sight is going back and forth from Hunter, Dick Hunter, Dick Hunter. The guy standing yells at me, "W, you doing, man?" They scramble, one trying to stand up, the other pulling his pants up, all the while both are fighting the fucking blind that's wrapped in between them. Me, in disbelief of what I just came up on, just stood there for what felt like forever. I stumbled over my words to find an apology and blurred out, "Nothin' guys, sorry, man, have fun," and turned back to my camp in a almost run. They yelled out to me to stop, but I didn't. Fucking longest 200-yard sprint ever. Got back to camp. My wife looked at me and instantly knew something had happened and asked what was up. I told her to grab her stuff and we hurried out of there without a word. About half to an hour later of sprint hiking, we had to stop. I still hadn't taken a dump, and I had to go, so we took a spur trail to break, snack, and tell her what happened. She told me she was worried and that I scared her. She was scared the whole time, thinking I had been chased by a bear or cougar or something and it was after us. I told her nothing like that it was just two hunters hiding out blowing each other. We talked a bit about it. She asked if they'd look for us. I told her I didn't think so, that they probably left after being caught. If they were set up? Yeah, they yelled at me, wanting to know what I was doing, if we should just make it back to the car and leave. No, let's wait them out just in case they are at the trailhead waiting. Like I said, we'd been out for about 2 weeks now and we have been making our way back and are less than a day's hike from the trailhead at this point. So they must have gone out after being caught, right? After a while of talking it over, we kind of just chuckled it off and hiked onto the creek where we are going to camp for the night. We made camp off trail in a nice outcrop with no incident. Next morning we wake up, break camp, do our morning routine and hike out to the trailhead. With that, we're not really thinking of the two hunters anymore. Well, as we get to the trailhead, we meet two ladies that had been prepping breakfast and now clean up. As we are walking to the parking lot, they chat us up with the usual backcountry questions of how long have we been out, how many miles did we do, did we see any bears, what did we eat? Then almost at the same time, one lady offered up some of their leftover food as the other gal starts yelling, "Hey hubby, these two have been hiking up on the same trail you and so we're just out on yesterday, but they were out for 2 weeks. Bring them some of that real food and juice." Hubby pokes his head out of their camper to say hi. Lo and behold, it's the fucking hunter that was against the tree. His smile faded as quick as his face turned white, then to an angry look when he realized who he's looking at. Then his buddy the giver turns the damn corner from their trailer to see me standing there. I feel the blood just drain from my body, and this guy's face turns from happy-go-lucky to disbelief/fear at the sight of me. The wife then asked if we happened on their husbands out there as they were out scouting for game yesterday. As I'm stumbling my words, they are darting their looks from me to themselves. Before I can say anything, my wife is answering, "Yes. We'd love some real food. No, we hadn't seen anyone. You guys are the first in 2 weeks." The wife turns to the hunters and says, "You guys must have had a real good hiding spot. Cheese and fucking rice." I think both the hunters and I had a mini heart attack. One of the guys just gives a nod. My wife and I graciously take their pancakes and fucking sausage of all goddamn things. I can see both hunters quietly talking to each other, staring over at me every once in a while. I'm doing my best to avoid the situation by packing up the car. While my wife is thanking the hunters' wives for the food, both fucking hunters, with sidearms on their hips, come up to me with a beer. The one that was on the tree kinda pushed it into my chest and asked if I seen anything out there. My heart freaking stopped. I again stumbled over my words, other than, some wild animals, nothing worth writing home about. Yeah, we didn't see much either, but we are really surprised you didn't hear us last night walk through your camp. Be careful, you never know what can happen out here in the middle of the woods. After a few seconds, the other one just smirks and they turn to leave with a, "Have a safe trip home." I wasn't sure what was going to happen at that moment, so I was prying myself for a fight. I was kind of shaken up as we were leaving the trailhead. My wife asked if I was okay and if those were the guys I saw. My reply was, "Yeah. W do you think, babe?" And then asked what they said to me. I told her I thought I was going to have to fight them, but that they just gave me a beer to buy my silence. I didn't mention the passive-aggressive threat they made about walking through our camp. Story 2. My girlfriend and I went for a night hike. A few months back, my girlfriend and I were bored hanging around the house and spontaneously decided to go out for a hike. We don't go hiking often, but the idea appealed to both of us, and even though there was only about an hour left of light, we figured we had enough time to go enjoy a hike before it got too dark. We quickly filled up our water bottles and put on the best walking shoes we had, and we were out the door, driving up into the mountains. Around my area there are many hiking trails, with the variety of trails increasing as you go up into the mountains. We tended to stay around the base of the mountains in the occasional case of us hiking, where most people would still be walking, but we wanted to change things up and progressed further up the mountain road to a trail a friend of mine had mentioned. We kept in mind our time and figured that we could hike for a bit and simply enjoy the new environment for us, and finish up before it was too late. We arrived at the trailhead and saw that there were no cars left along the road where the trail commences, but didn't think much of it due to the time. We still had a good 45 minutes until dark, so we continued on. We start walking down a fairly steep hill that then recoups the elevation at the bottom with an equally steep hill that you have to ascend. We reach the top and then it's smooth sailing from there. We see a lone coyote off of the trail a ways off, and some rabbits, and I made a quip about how those rabbits might need to be careful with that coyote lurking around. She playfully hit me for that one. Approximately less than a mile into the trail, we saw a large, fallen tree that made a bridge over a dried riverbed and decided to take a rest, climb around on it, and take pictures. We're there for about 10 minutes, and then resume hiking. We continue on the trail for a short distance, until she hears a rustle in the trees behind us. We stop, mildly spooked due to the assumed size of whatever made that rustling, but continue on only briefly before she decides she's done and that we need to head back. It's twilight now, so I agree with her and we turn around to head back to the car. When we made it back to the fallen tree, my shoe had come untied, so I used the trunk to fix my loose laces and looked behind us for the first time on the hike, uncharacteristic for me, but hey, I was having fun, why be paranoid? I see a person dressed entirely in black with their hood on that was a significant distance behind us, walking at a slow, even pace. It wasn't something out of the ordinary, so what if they're wearing black with their hood on? I wear black most of the time and it's cold out, I shouldn't make assumptions. This does trigger me to be more alert, however, and I inform my girlfriend of this person's presence. It's now dusk. We continue on at an intentionally faster pace and go through a winding section of the trail, and I lose sight of the person. When we come around the final bend of the section, I figure they're far behind us and that there's nothing to worry about. Sooner than later the person is behind us again, but much closer. Probably 50 feet in comparison to 100 feet before, and we had increased our speed, so this alarmed us. We briskly walk around another bend and as soon as we come around it, we book it. It seemed to be a natural reaction on both of our parts as we just started running without a word said to initiate it. We are nearing the trailhead now, with only the hills to deal with. We catch our breaths for a moment, and I turn around again. I see the person seemingly halt a sprint upon noticing me looking back, as if they were trying to uphold the illusion of simply walking. At this point I shout, "Go!" and we sprint down the hill. What little light was left struggled to make its way through the dense trees surrounding us, and the steep hill proved challenging to run down without a clear path to be seen. We both stumbled down the hill, almost falling multiple times and slamming our feet onto rocks and loose brush, but we didn't fall and we didn't look behind us. We make it to the bottom, but must continue up the initial hill and then we will have made it out. We persevere up the incline and make it back to our car. I briefly breathe in relief as I start my car, heart pounding and adrenaline racing. As I reverse onto the road, the person emerges at the trailhead, apparently breathing heavily. We finally get a glimpse of him. His hood had fallen off of his head, exposing his pale complexion and dead eyes that were only illuminated by a single lantern at the start of the trail. He was holding something in his hand, but it was too dark to see and I was not interested in sticking around to make out the object. I shift into drive and accelerate as fast as my car could muster, leaving him behind in the dust of the empty side of the road. Night trail stalker dude, let's not meet. Story 3. The Smoker in the Woods. This story happened about 2 years ago while I was in university working on my degree in biology. I had signed up for a trip to gather samples for an experiment some students in the ecology department were going to run. It required the collection of samples from several sites, so they recruited biology, ecology, and forestry majors to help them complete the sampling in a shorter period. The area my group was to take samples from was a few hours from my uni in the Pacific Northwest. There are 9 of us in my group, 8 students and a supervising professor. We got to the campsite in the late evening and set up our tents. One of the other students had brought a big container of split-pea soup from home and was sharing it with the others on the trip. I don't really care for split-pea soup, so I declined the offer. Everyone had some except me, one other student, and the professor. Come the next morning, the 5 students who had eaten the soup weren't in the best of shape. They were in the grips of some gnarly food poisoning and were in no shape to hike for 8 or 9 hours to collect the samples we needed. The professor who was supervising us had originally some rules, such as people travel in groups of at least 2 and we had to return to camp by nightfall. Now those rules were tossed out to make sure we kept to our timetable and collected all of the required samples. We were just told to do your best to complete the work assigned as long as you can do it safely. That morning I set out for a long day of hiking. After a mile or so I ran into the stream I was supposed to follow. I needed to travel about 4 miles upstream, stopping every quarter mile to collect samples of the water and soil. This meant I had to hustle to get back before dark. Halfway through the day I realized that wasn't going to happen. About 2 miles into my hike I stopped for lunch sitting on a log overlooking the stream. The scene was really peaceful until I smelled the cigarettes. It wasn't the smell of a cigarette being smoked, more the musty smell of a heavy smoker's car where cigarette butts had been left to ferment for weeks on end. I looked around but couldn't see anyone. I just assumed that the wind had blown the scent of some hunter or hiker over to me, but minutes later the smell hadn't faded. The vegetation in the area wasn't that thick, but there were still a lot of places for someone to duck behind a tree or bush. I was unnerved that someone was apparently staying close enough to me for me to smell them for this long without so much as a word. I quickly packed up the trash from my lunch and continued up the stream. The musty cigarette smell went away for the next few hours. It wasn't until I arrived at my last sample location late into dusk that I smelled it again. The woods were getting really dim by this point. Looking back on it, it was a really stupid idea to stay out so late, as just hiking back to camp in the dark would be pretty dangerous even without a cigarette-smoking stalker. Having just put the collection tubes in my bag, I shined my flashlight around the darkening woods looking for whoever was giving off the smell. I didn't see anything that caught my attention. It would actually be more correct to say I saw too many things in the dim light that might have been a head sticking out from behind a tree or someone crouched low in the foliage. I didn't like the idea of being in the dark woods with a stranger who for the second time was lurking near me without revealing themselves, so I began to double time it back down the stream. I had a much better time on my way back even though it was dark because I didn't have to stop to take any samples. Even so, I didn't get back to camp till a bit before 10. I was the last one to get back and everyone but the professor was already asleep. I didn't mention the cigarette smell to the professor because he seemed tired as it was and he headed to his bed in the RV soon after I got back. I headed to my tent soon after. At some point in the night I woke up needing to pee. I decided to head into the woods to do my business as I knew some of the other students were still feeling ill and needed the RV toilet for more urgent matters than just having to take a leak. I walked about 100 feet into the woods, found a tree and did what I needed to. As I turned to go back to camp, something caught my eye. Somewhere off in the woods there was a tiny red glow. I was confused as to what it was until it flared momentarily and I realized it was the cherry of a cigarette. I stood there for a while watching the red embers glow, fade them and move slightly closer to the ground as whoever was smoking would take it out of their mouth. Not being able to see the person, I assumed they were watching the camp. I didn't know if they had seen me make my way into the woods or not, as the fire had been doused and the moon was only half full, so there wasn't very much light. I made my way slowly back to camp as quietly as I could and entered the RV to wake up the professor. I told him about the person smoking in the woods and about the smell of cigarettes earlier that day. However, when we got outside the RV, the ember from the cigarette was gone. My professor woke the other student who hadn't come down with food poisoning and we took turns watching over camp. I didn't see or smell anything else when I was on guard duty and went to sleep when the professor woke up for his turn. In the morning the professor, the other student and I went to where I guessed the smoker had been standing the night before, and sure enough we found about 10 cigarette butts on the ground next to a tree. The tree itself looked like someone had been twisting and stabbing a knife or other sharp object into it, as the bark and outer layers of wood had been damaged and chipped away. The professor decided that the group should head back that day even though we hadn't collected all the samples we were assigned to be on the safe side. We packed up camp and drove down the thin dirt trail without incident. The second we got onto the paved highway, though, a white paneled van pulled out of a clearing just off the shoulder and began following us. This van stayed behind us all the way back, pulling off the highway when we did, taking the same surface streets that we did, and only stopped following us when we turned onto the road leading to our university campus. Everyone was freaked out by this, but it was around 9 at night on a weekend, so the security office on campus was closed. We decided to unload the RV and call it a night as the van hadn't followed us onto campus. I offered to help the professor catalog and store the collection tubes from our trip, so it was another couple hours before I left the biological sciences building and started heading toward the dorm building I lived in. I stepped out into the cool night air and began walking, my professor having left the building in the other direction to get to his car and drive home. It was a couple dozen feet outside of the building, which was now locked, when I was hit with the musty smell of old cigarettes. I looked around and about 25 yards away in the darkness off of the footpath I saw the cherry of a cigarette smoldering away. I was pretty scared at this point, but hoped it was only a student or some faculty staying late having a smoke. I couldn't completely convince myself of this as the musty cigarette smell was the same as what I smelled in the woods the previous night. I started down the footpath and soon passed whoever was smoking. 100 feet or so later I looked over my shoulder and saw the cigarette cherry bobbing in the darkness. The smoker was following me. This creeped me out a bit more, but I still held it together. That is until I rounded a small stand of trees and saw a white paneled van parked alone in a parking lot. I took off at a sprint toward my dorm building. I looked over my shoulder a few steps into my run. I saw the cherry of the cigarette fall to the ground and a dark shape beginning to move after me. I didn't look back again, but I could hear someone running in the grass off of the footpath. I got to the entrance to my dorm building and frantically waved my key card in front of the card reader that controlled the door lock. As soon as I hear the soft beep, I open the door, jump through the doorway and shut the door quickly. I stopped and peered through the glass door. I saw the dark shape stop just short of the lit pathway. I just watched for a minute or two, then I saw the spark of a lighter. The light was just barely bright enough to illuminate a shaggy beard and brim of a baseball cap before it disappeared and was replaced with the red glow of a cigarette. I turned and headed up the stairs to my dorm room. By the time I get to my window overlooking the same yard I had just run through, there is no trace of a dark figure or a cigarette cherry. After that, I didn't see that white paneled van again or smell that musty cigarette smell, and I hope I never do. Story 4. Wrong house. This just happened about 20 minutes ago. I just moved back home with my parents, divorce, and they live sort of in the woods away from the main roads. My old house that I just moved from was in the next town over and on a main road, so if you called the cops they could be there in 2 seconds. Here, it takes a little bit sometimes. So I'm having my coffee on the couch and my daughter is playing on the floor. We are the only ones home right now. I walk out into the kitchen to make more coffee and I pass by the dining room windows which look out onto the road in front of the house. I see a man come walking up the road, which is kind of weird because it's such a private area that you don't ever really see cars or people unless they live here. So I watch him coming slowly up the road and then he stops in front of the neighbor's house and is staring at the house, then back over his shoulder, and he does this a few times before I'm like okay. So I slink out into the entryway and lock the front door. Walk back into the kitchen and he's still looking at the neighbor's house. I go into a back room and retrieve a gun and I stay watching him out the window but out of sight. Then I watch him move forward and stop in our driveway. My daughter is still watching TV in the living room as I keep looking back at her. I take my cell phone out and call 911 and say that I think someone is about to try to break in and I give them the address. They said they were sending someone ASAP and to keep the doors locked. I put my phone in my back pocket still on and then I heard 2 loud thumps on the front door. Then again. So I calmly walk over to the window next to the door and open it, pointing the gun at the man. He steps back and goes, "Oh, wrong house." So I say, "Yeah, wrong house," and keep it pointed at him. He stares at me for a moment, which felt like literally 20 minutes, before turning around and leaving. I could still see him in view when the cops pulled up, so I pointed and they went and got him. They said they found a lot of drugs on him and 2 knives in his pocket along with some money, so he was probably up to no good. Story 5. Chased and stalked through the woods at night. Despite a few creepy instances as a child, there has only been one time in my adult life that I have truly felt primal fear. My apology if it's a little long, but trust one in being as concise as possible and need to explain the surroundings a little at first. I live in a village in the middle of the English countryside. To paint an accurate picture of its size, it has a population of 4,000, but feels more like 1,000 due to its spread-out nature and being surrounded on all sides by lots of fields, farms and woods that eventually connects onto a pretty famous forest. It's kinda in the middle of nowhere, and because of this has notoriously bad phone and internet connections. Having lived here all my life, I know the place like the back of my hand. I know where all the public footpaths through the woods/fields are, where they connect, which are shortcuts, where to cross deep streams, etc. I have gone on walks in this area throughout my childhood with parents and alone as an adult. Nothing bad had happened. I felt safe here. This story takes place last summer in July after I moved back home from university, had yet to get a job and smoked a lot of weed. A habit my parents despised and which I tried to keep hidden from them by going for evening walks, multiple pre-rolled joints hidden away in my hoodie pocket. As usual this day they both got home at 5 p.m. We had dinner but chatted for a while longer than usual as my mum had had quite a hectic day and was telling me about it. Because of this I ended up heading out for my walk an hour later than routine, around 7 p.m. But as it was summer the sun was still shining so, honestly, I didn't really notice that it would start getting dark while I was still out. The woodland closest to my house is less than 5 minutes away and you enter through a gate into a farmer's field. You can see across the open area quite far until the first set of small woods obscures your view. That's where I was heading as I knew this track takes under 2 hours and leads back onto the same path I was standing on now. More than enough time to smoke the 3 joints in my pocket and for the smell to leave my clothing I had thought. This entire area is very popular for dog walkers, so it's not unusual to see other people while you are about, and as this is a village everybody says hello to everybody. I lit my first joint and started walking. I'm just in my own world for a while until I was less than 100 feet before the entrance to the woods. An elderly man was coming out of them throwing a ball for his collie dog. I finished my joint and stubbed it out. As I got closer I recognized it was John who lived on the road next to mine and knew my grandpa. We stopped and said hello as I stroked his dog Max. While talking I see another man coming out of the woods. No dog. Bright green jacket. Very tall and had a good 10 years on me age-wise. Me and John chat another minute and say goodbye. He warns me not to stay out here too long as it will start getting dark soon. True, the sky was bright pink and orange. The sun was indeed beginning to set. I hadn't really noticed. I continued on down the path towards the man. When we were nearly passing each other I looked up to make brief eye contact, smile and say hello, like everyone here does, even if you don't recognize the person. My eyes instantly met his. He was already looking at me. His dark eyes locked on mine. He wasn't smiling. I didn't know him at all but I knew something was wrong. It was in his eyes. I swallowed my politeness and looked at the ground as we passed. I had lived in my uni city the past couple years so I knew a red flag when I saw one and my country bumpkin manners evaporated. I quickened my pace a little and before entering the woods slyly looked back. The guy was still walking in the same direction following John. I felt relieved, laughed, cursed the weed for making me paranoid while lighting up another joint and started walking into the woods. It takes about 30 minutes to follow the path through the woods to the end. The pathway exit opened into another field that led to another set of woods. The sky was now violet, the dimming light having been obscured to me by the trees. I was already smoking my last joint and was near the entrance to the second set of woods when I felt it. Fear. Complete, crippling, absolute fear worked its way like electricity through every layer of flesh. I'd never felt anything like it before or since, but I knew what it was. I whipped around. Standing at the exit of the first set of woods was the man. I could still make out his green jacket in the fading light. He's fucking doubled back. And very quickly too. I had looked back several times while in those trees and he hadn't been there. For a second I froze, as did he knew I'd seen. To sprint the distance between us would take him about 5 minutes. He was obviously in good shape. I threw the spliff and fucking bolted into the woods. The only way I could go, I didn't dare look behind me. I sprinted for a couple minutes before taking a sharp left turn off the path into the trees. Hoping to throw him off a bit but I couldn't see a fucking thing. The light was already darkening and the trees made it 100 times worse, especially as I was now in the thick of them. Their branches caught on my clothes like fingers, whipping and scratching my bare legs so bad I bled. I ran and ran, my lungs protesting in pain, hating me for smoking so much, while my heart was throwing itself against my rib cage trying to escape. I couldn't anymore. I threw myself on the ground behind a particularly thick trunk. My back against it, knees to my chest, hand thrown over my mouth to stifle my labored breathing, desperately trying to pump air into my lungs for the next sprint. I listened for the first time. A few seconds pass silently. Then I hear him. Heavy footfall snapping twigs behind me and about 20 feet to my left. I dare not look in case he sees me. I have my phone but now I have little chance of signal being where I was. And knew he'd either hear me talking or see the light from the display. I'm not ashamed to say at this point I start to cry. The tears fell silently down my cheeks. What the fuck? I hear a deep voice exclaim. Where are you? I know you're here. I saw you. I have to clasp both hands across my mouth to stop my scream escaping. I can hear him moving around. I panic and I find enough courage to slowly peek from behind the tree. He was about 10 feet behind me, less than 20 feet to the left, with his back to me. I moved back and my eyes searched the area around me. I picked up a pretty heavy rock. I carefully check on him again. His back is still turned but he's searching through the trees, hunched down lower to the ground now. I made a snap decision and with everything I had left I threw the rock behind me and to the right. It clattered through the branches of the trees and made one hell of a noise. I watched him immediately bolt in its direction. Laughing. He fucking laughed. I paused a little hearing his footsteps get quieter until I thought I wouldn't be so visible to him if I moved and threw myself forward. I ran, trying to put as much distance between us as possible, but I was also aware that I was getting further and further away from home. I knew there had to be a stream somewhere close. If I found the stream I can follow it as it borders the land and runs parallel to some of the footpaths. I ran and ran until the trees finally cleared and I can just make out another field through them on the other side. I thank God and push myself a little bit further till I'm out of the trees and the ground disappears from below my feet and I go head over shoulders down the stream embankment. I crash into the water below, my open mouth and lungs filling with muddy water. As I splutter it out, I feel both relieved to have found the stream and terrified he's heard me. My phone is now ruined. I slowly make my way downstream as quiet as possible, listening out for him the whole time as the stream borders the woods, looking up periodically just in case. After a while, maybe half an hour, I notice the trees begin to thin out and realize this is the edge of the woods where I would have been exiting and where the pathway connected to the original one I'd started on. If I ran I could get home in less than 20 minutes. As quiet as I could I dragged myself on my stomach back up the embankment army style, wanting to stay as low as possible. I peeked over the top. I could just make out the opening of the wood's exit path about 50 feet away. I sat and scanned the forest line for a couple minutes. My eyes are trying to make out movement despite it now being pitch black. Nothing. I couldn't hear anything either. I pushed myself up and sprinted as fast as I could across the field onto the pathway. I knew the gate I entered through was in the adjoining field. It really wasn't far. I was so happy. "You fucking bitch," came a screech from across the field. I swear my legs nearly gave out then and there. He had been waiting for me. I turned my head and saw him sprinting out of the woods at full pelt. I screamed and pushed myself further, tears coating my face. All I could do was run. I crossed into the main field now and I could see the moonlight shining off the metal gate. My house was just 5 minutes away after that. I have never focused on anything as much as that gate. He was faster than me and getting closer, screaming at me the whole time about how he was going to slit my throat. I ran and ran, pushing myself up and over the gate and ran up the road. I dared look as I made the turning for my road. He was still fucking following me. I raced up my driveway and threw myself through the door, running into the living room crying and screaming hysterically, pointing behind me towards the door. My dad ran outside while my mum grabbed a hold of me as I collapsed shaking. As it turns out, my parents had already called the police. As I said, I was going out for an hour or so at 7 and it was now past 12 a.m. and I hadn't answered when they had called my now broken phone, very unlike me. We called the police again to explain. They came and I gave a full statement. Both my parents and the police were horrified. Nothing like this happens here. There hasn't been a reported rape or murder in the last 100 years. But one look at me and it was obvious I was telling the truth. I was covered head to toes in cuts and bruises, soaking wet and covered in mud and blood. I won't go into how this experience changed me, it's depressing, but I will say the thing that scares me the most is that they never even had a suspect. Despite him following me so closely, he was gone by the time my dad ran outside. That guy is still out there. And who knows what he is really capable of. Story 6. The Singing Lady. I live in Florida and this incident happened about 3 weeks after Hurricane Irma, so not that long ago. Back in July, the ex and I had just finalized the divorce and I moved into a gated neighborhood where every house was rented out by the same rental companies/landlords. It's a very small neighborhood with about 15 houses tops. All 15 houses are bordered around a man-made lake with the backyards facing the lake. No one really has a fenced backyard. When you walk out your back door, you see the lake in front of you and your neighbor's backyards on each side of you. Everyone in the neighborhood seemed very close. Someone was always hosting a family-friendly party/barbecue or having people over to watch sports. I am still depressed about my divorce, so I never partook in these social gatherings. The only person I got to know was my next-door neighbor, Steve, an active Navy soldier with a huge love for guns. Steve is the true hero in this nightmare. My daughter Alice is 4 years old and I get her every weekend. Alice's bedroom window faces the backyard towards the lake. I spoiled that girl to death. She truly is my everything and I count down the days to the weekend every week just to be with her. That's why I was upset when Irma came and I had to go almost 3 weekends without seeing her. The weekend before the storm she was with her mom, then obviously the weekend of the storm she was with her mom, then on top of that the weekend after she had to be with her mom because my power was still out. No, see, in Florida is miserable. The humidity was so bad that week that I slept in my daughter's room the whole week because she has the only room with a window that faces the lake. I opened the window, exposing just the window screen, so the wind from the lake could cool the room as much as possible while I slept. Eventually the power comes back and Alice starts visiting me again like normal. That was when the nightmares started. My daughter would complain about the singing lady and how she doesn't like her anymore. I thought maybe she was referring to one of my ex's friends or one of the teachers at her school. Maybe there was a teacher at her school that sang to the kids that she didn't like? That Saturday night Alice woke up in the middle of the night screaming bloody murder. I ran into her room and turned on the light and found her hiding under her covers. I asked her what was wrong and all she could do was point to an empty corner of her room and say, "Look, look." There was nothing there. She was acting as if she saw a ghost. After I calmed her down, she started to talk about the singing lady again. "Please tell the singing lady not to come back. Please, Daddy, make her go away." Obviously, she is having nightmares, right? I showed her there was nothing in the closet and nothing under the bed and that there was nothing to be afraid of. She calmed down and went back to sleep. I went back to my room and quickly fell back asleep. It couldn't have been more than 20 minutes before Alice comes running into my room screaming, "She's back. She's back." Alice absolutely refused to go back to her room, so I let her sleep with me. The next morning, Sunday morning, I took Alice out to breakfast and we stopped by Target to pick up a baby monitor. I haven't used one since her mom and I were still married, but I wanted to easily be able to hear her when she started having these nightmares again, so I could respond quicker. After I set them up, I showed Alice how they worked to give her assurance that I could hear her and she was safe. That night she slept soundly and didn't make a peep all night. The following weekend Alice had to stay with her mother again because she caught a stomach virus from one of her little friends at school. It was Saturday night and I was sound asleep in my bed. Around 2 a.m. is when I heard it, a woman's voice humming a soft nursery rhyme through the baby monitor. The humming soft singing got louder and clearer as the voice got closer to the monitor. I wasn't dreaming, I could hear a woman softly singing lullabies in my daughter's bedroom. I had never been so scared and dumbfounded in my life. I was feeling a mixture of pure terror and disbelief. Then the voice spoke out, "Alice, sweetie, are you awake?" Adrenaline shot through my veins. I jumped out of bed and locked my bedroom door. I picked up my cell and called Steve from next door. He didn't waste a second. As soon as I got off the phone with him, I heard him storm out his back door screaming, "Don't you fucking move." I ran outside and found him aiming his shotgun at a woman crouched outside my daughter's window. The one I had left open after Irma and never closed. Steve quickly dropped his guard when he recognized the woman. It was Jean, the neighborhood maintenance man/woman. Steve's wife came running out after him and confirmed it was her. Jean played dumb. Said she was not singing and didn't even know my daughter's name. She said she was near my daughter's window because she was doing her weekly patrol for gators and thought she saw one approach our house from the lake. Bullfucking. That bitch was singing, and she called out to my daughter by name. Yes, it's true that there have been a few gators spotting around the neighborhood, and yes, part of Jean's job was to patrol the lake at night every now and then, but at 2 a.m.? I obviously knew it was bullshit, and even though neither Steve nor his wife called her out on it, I could tell from the look on their faces that they didn't believe her either. The next morning, I went over to Steve's house to thank him and tell him exactly what happened. He told me Jean and her husband have been known to be a little cuckoo, but this is by far the craziest thing to happen so far. Steve helped me install metal bars on Alice's window that afternoon. Story 7. Hysterical laughing at 3 a.m. This isn't a long story and doesn't have a particularly climatic ending, but here goes. So my boyfriend and I were visiting a few friends in Richmond, Virginia. We went with another couple and decided to get an Airbnb. The other couple that we went with picked out the Airbnb, but they hadn't really been to RVA before. So the place they picked was about 15 to 20 minutes outside of the city center. Bit of a pain in the ass, but not a big deal. The neighborhood was nice. The house was okay. When we got into the house, it seemed I can't really describe it. It was nice enough, we were only staying for a weekend, and the owner left us some banana bread, but there was just this odd vibe to it. A bit of a creepy vibe. For example, when I put our stuff in our bedroom, I opened up the closet, and there was nothing in it but a chair. Not like a fold-up chair, but like a small, child's chair, facing the bed from the closet. No hangers, no other linens, no towels. Just this small chair in an empty closet. I know that reading it doesn't sound creepy, but I promise you, it was weird. I brushed it off and we decided to settle in, and then go and meet up with some friends in the city. Day turned into night, we all had a bit to drink, and decided to call it an evening at around 1:30 a.m. The four of us headed back to the house and went to bed. Usually, when I drink, there is nothing in the world that will wake me up. My head hits the pillow and that is where I will remain until the sun comes up. So I don't know why it didn't happen this particular night. Maybe it was the feel of the house, but I woke up at around 3 a.m. to a quiet giggle. Like a grown man giggling. I thought maybe my boyfriend was just giggling in his sleep. But then the giggling started getting louder. And it sounded like it was coming from outside our window. The window was located behind the bed and above our heads. So I quietly snuck up to see if I could see anything. Nothing. There was no one out there. But it went quiet. The giggling had stopped. So I was about to just go back to sleep. But then it started back up again. This time, I knew it wasn't my boyfriend. And I knew it wasn't the other couple. The giggling grew louder and louder, until it was just full-blown hysterical laughter. Right outside our window. At 3 a.m. I felt my boyfriend's hand clench mine. I didn't even know he was awake. I asked him, "Did you bring your gun?" "No, but I have my knife." He asked if I saw anything out there, and I said no. The laughing stopped after about 15 minutes. We stayed up till about 4 a.m., looking outside the window, making sure that laughter didn't come back. We finally went back to sleep. When we woke up the next morning, we asked the couple if they heard anything, and they said no. In fact, they thought we were crazy. One of them suggested that I dream it. But how did my boyfriend and I both dream that there was some random person laughing their heads off outside of our bedroom window? I can't tell what's creepier, to be honest. The fact that we heard that at 3 a.m. in this creepy house right next to our window, or that when I looked outside there was nothing there. I guess you can chalk up my not being able to see it to maybe this person being directly under our window. But why would someone do that? Why would someone just stay for 15 minutes outside of a house, giggling and laughing and then just, presumably leave? Nothing happened after that. We went back home, but to this day my boyfriend and I still bring it up as one of the creepiest things to ever happen to us. So, to the random dude laughing outside the bedroom window at 3 a.m., let's never meet. Story 8. Camping gone wrong. So I've had a few L&M encounters, and several creepy encounters from where I live, the people I encounter on a daily basis, etc. This happened a few years ago, when I was 13. I was somewhat popular in school at the time, and I had around 4 very, very close friends. Rose, Lynn, Noah, and Zach were the main ones. We went on many adventures around that time, camping, road trips, and the beach. Noah's family was pretty wealthy, and all of our families were pretty lenient with rules. One day, the summer before 8th grade, we went on a camping trip with Lynn's older sister Margot and Zach's older brother Todd. So there were 7 of us. Lynn, Zach and I were 13, Noah and Rose were 14, and Margot and Todd were both 17. We decided to go camping in a nearby forest, around 20 miles from Noah's house. It was pretty much in the middle of nowhere. Noah's house and his neighborhood were the closest homes, and there were no signals for phones or any electronics. We get to the spot easily and without problems, and we make camp. The girls in one tent, the boys in another. Maybe it was a bad idea to have 7 teens, ages 13 to 17, with no phone in the woods, but our parents were lenient like I said and confident we would be fine since the woods were not known for anything bad or dangerous. So we set up the tents, went swimming in a nearby lake, and came back and made dinner over a fire which was about 20 feet away from the tents, which were 4 feet away from each other, by the way. We have a s'mores and do all those stupid camping things before Lynn and Margot announce they are going to sleep. That left Todd, Rose, Zach, Noah and I as we joked around, told scary stories, and just overall had a good time. Then Margot walks up annoyed and tells us that whoever is messing with the side of the tent, to stop it. Keep in mind no one left the group, and tents were far enough away to not bother anyone in the tents. She explains that someone keeps on touching the side of the tent, running something on it, and we dismiss her. Todd states that it probably is a tree branch, and Rose and I decide to go to sleep as well. So we head back to the tent, Lynn is asleep, and we settle in, me closest to the opening, Margot next to Lynn, who is at the opposite side of the tent, and Rose in between Margot and I. I managed to fall asleep easily within 5 minutes, until I woke up suddenly, for what seemed like no reason. I checked my phone, I still brought it and a portable charger just to take pictures, and it was literally the middle of the night, at 2:15. I looked around, my eyes getting used to the darkness, trying to figure out why I woke up. A tapping sound on the tent was what I first noticed. And a soft giggling. It sounded somewhat deep, like a male voice, but I couldn't be sure. After what felt like an hour but was probably a minute or two, the tapping and giggling stopped. I was convinced it was my imagination, or maybe one of the boys trying to prank us, or even a tree branch like Todd suggested earlier. Telling myself it was a tree branch and lack of sleep, I fell back asleep until Rose woke me up around dawn. Everyone was awake, and we decided to hike a little. We decided to go in 2 groups, because we planned on spending the night again and we didn't want anyone messing with our stuff. Even though these woods weren't popular with camping, we didn't want to risk it. Margot, Lynn, Rose and I left to go hiking for a couple hours while the boys opted to stay behind and fish, swim, and cook food. We hiked for about 2 hours and we came back to the boys not at the campsite. Annoyed, Margot went down to the lake with Lynn to find them. Rose and I made our way back to the tents, and I'll be honest and say I screamed and almost wet my pants. The tents were slashed. I inspected it closer after regaining composure because I was usually the more collected one of the 2 of us. It seemed to be made with a small knife, as the cuts were small. Our tents were made of material that was pretty hard to cut into, and it seemed like the person had a pocket knife, I guessed. The boys, Margot and Lynn, came running to our screams, and were obviously startled. We decided to pack up and head home early, because for one, the tents were ripped too much to use again comfortably, and 2, Rose, Lynn and I were very creeped out. Even more so when Todd announced that his tires were slashed. We were all freaking out, obviously. There was no cell service, Todd's tires were slashed, and there was no way any of us wanted to stay any longer. Luckily, Todd reported that Margot's tires looked fine and Margot stated that she would take Noah and Lynn, drop them off to call 911 and their parents, and come back for us. She drove a car and there wasn't enough room for more than 3 people as the back was filled up with the camping stuff. Zach, Todd, Rose and I were left at the campgrounds, and we decided to begin a hike back towards the main road so Margot wouldn't have to drive so far. Also, Rose and I refused to stay anywhere near the camp area. We began hiking. My phone died. The last time I looked at it, it was 1 in the afternoon. Zach and Rose both had working phones and constantly updated us on how far we had been walking. I began to hear branches snapping from behind us, closer to the trees than we walked, and I got more and more paranoid as time went on. I told Todd, and he seemed to get more wary of our surroundings, constantly looking over his shoulder. We had been walking for about 30 minutes. Margot was probably at Noah's house or almost there when Todd screamed, "Run!" Naturally, I looked behind my shoulder before I began running. 3 hooded figures were running towards us. 2 had knives, and they all looked around 6'3" or taller. Todd was 6'1", but I doubted he could defend all of us against them. Even though it was broad daylight, I couldn't make out any facial features. They all appeared over or around 200 pounds. The shortest one was probably 6'2", but they all wore hoods and had masks on. Like ski masks. It sounds totally fake and I don't care if you don't believe me, but I was scared shitless that day. We began running and the three guys finally gave up, or decided we weren't worth terrorizing, because we lost them. We made it to the main road where we waited, walking quickly, constantly looking over our shoulders in fear until Margot arrived. We told the police everything, and they searched the woods nearby. They never found any evidence we had been there, or the guys were there, or that anything happened besides pictures of the lake around the area and the shredded tents. I don't know what would have happened if they had caught us. I'm fairly tall, I was around 5'10" during this time, only around 125 pounds, Rose was around 5'1" and 100 pounds, and Zach was barely 5'9" at the time. He probably outweighed me by 10 pounds maximum. I am so thankful that I told Todd about them. I have no doubt they would have been able to catch us if he hadn't been looking over his shoulder constantly, and I am so thankful we all got physical activity regularly, were fast enough to outrun them, and that they gave up. So, whoever you guys are, let's never meet. Story, mine. Creepy guy hanging round on holiday campsite. I've posted this before as a reply to a comment. It's been playing on my mind because last week it came up in my time hop and then I thought I'd post it here. So last summer, I booked a glamping trip in the next county over. The website looked beautiful, a campsite of 6 large yurts outside a lovely little village. Coincidentally, I had driven through that village before as it's close to a really nice historic castle I like to visit occasionally. So we pay our money, and my husband, 2 kids and I pitch up. It's one of the last weekends of the summer, and it was lovely weather. The campsite was on a small hill, and the people who owned it lived on top of the hill in their farmhouse. We were checking in on a Sunday for 2 nights, as we were shift workers at the time. We passed other people checking out and they all looked happy. The owners of the site showed us down to our yurt and mentioned that we were the only ones on the site for our stay this time, it being a Sunday. We were happy with that, to be honest, because with 2 young kids it meant they could make noise if they wanted and we would disturb anybody. When she showed us around, she did say the yurt door didn't lock, but none of them did. Which is okay, fine, because you don't lock a tent, right? The place was in its own mini wooded area and it was absolutely beautiful. The owner also mentioned the kids would be safe to wander because they had perimeter fences because of their dogs. The first night was fun. We had a barbecue, the kids played and then went to sleep at about 8. I found it hard to sleep, but I often do it somewhere new. There was only patchy phone coverage, so we read until we fell asleep. The next morning my husband seemed a bit out of sorts, but I asked him if he was all right and we were all, yep, fine. So I left it. We went out for the day and had a great time. The whole day was blazing hot and then we got back. Was washing up after dinner and the kids were playing and a shadow came over the whole place. I felt eyes on me and it went really cold. Honestly, it felt like something bad was going to happen. I felt dread hit me. We'd already paid to stay, but I pulled my husband to one side and said, "We have to leave right now. I don't know why. I've just got a bad feeling, please let's just go home." Normally he'd try and talk me out of something like this, but he didn't. He started getting the kids together and I packed our stuff. We went to the farmhouse where the couple who owned it were sitting outside playing with their dogs. My husband started loading up the car, while I apologized to them and explained we needed to leave because our youngest was feeling ill. They said how sorry they were about it, and then just as I turned to leave the man asked if my husband had been outside the house last night, about March 4th in the morning? I said no, he hadn't left my side all night, I would have woken. He asked me if I was sure. By this point my husband was by my side, and answered that no, he hadn't. And why? Well, says the guy, the security lights came on and the dog started barking, and when we looked outside there was a man wandering around, who then turned around and walked back down in the direction of the yurts. They assumed it was my husband. We both said it wasn't, and said our goodbyes quickly. I tore out of that place in the car, and then about a quarter mile down the road, my husband turned to me and said, "You're right, I was quiet this morning. I didn't say anything because I thought you'd take the piss. I wanted to use the bathroom in the wee hours, but as I was about to get up, I heard footsteps on the decking outside. Not hooves or something on 4 legs, something on two legs. I lay there as quiet as possible and hoped the kids wouldn't wake up or something. Nope, nope, nope. It still freaks me out now. Story 10. A Florida woman crawled out of my hotel mirror to rob me. This past Monday my coworkers and I returned to our hotel from a day of workout in the field. Rebecca and I walked to our rooms, and as we stood outside of our rooms, I opened mine and I saw someone in the bathroom. I said, "Hello." Nobody answered. My first instinct was that it was a cleaning lady in there for some reason, and then I saw my bag with my clothes in her hands. I said to my coworker, "There's a woman in my room." Then I asked the woman, "What are you doing with my stuff?" It gets a little fuzzy here because I can't remember everything I said and what she said, but she kept mumbling about how her key still worked, how it still worked, and that's how she got in. I was in shock, and she was obviously very flustered having been caught mid-robbery. She dropped my bags and fumbled around with her purse and a white plastic bag. By this time my coworker was behind me watching all the insanity unfold. This woman was scrambling and walking towards the door, and I said, "What's in the bag?" thinking it is probably my stuff, and so she said, No, it's just my things, I'll show you," and so she did. I looked and I didn't see anything of mine, and so since I'm obviously in shock at this time, I let her leave. I went into my room and it was ransacked. I did a quick look around to see if anything had been taken. All of my electronics were still there. Then I went into the bathroom and I saw my underwear, my bikini, and my clothes shoved into my own bags randomly. Even my passport was shoved in there. Then I looked on the counter and I saw that she got into my medication. I'm not sure what was going through my head at the moment other than I wanted it back, so I ran out the door to go find her. I ran to the laundry room downstairs and out to the sides of the hotel, and I didn't see her. I realized I was never going to find her, so my coworker and I went down to the lobby to tell them what happened, and then we called the police. We went back up to my room to wait, and I noticed that there is a metal bat on my bed a little larger than one of those novelty wooden bats you can get at a baseball game, but there's also a flashlight on the end. She must have left it behind in her hurry. She also left behind a necklace that must have fallen out of her bag when she was scrambling with mine. I was mostly freaking out at this point because I thought that she'd gotten away with my medication that I need. The police got there and took our statements and looked around the room as well. One thing that I noticed was that there were bits of drywall in the sink, and I pointed that out to the cops, but none of us really knew where it came from. We started looking at the door and the windows to see if she pried her way in somehow, but there was nothing. So we kind of just went with the idea that she had a spare key or something, even though the hotel front desk was adamant that there's no way that could be. The officer that came brought 2 more officers as backup because they thought the woman might still be in the vicinity. But after our statements were taken, there was nothing else they could really do, so they left. I sat down to finally make some calls to tell people, and as I'm on the phone, I'm thinking about the drywall in the sink, and it still didn't make sense to me. So I'm on the phone and looking at the drywall and the mirror on the wall right above it. And then it hit me. I got my coworker and asked her to help me pull this mirror on the wall. And we took the mirror down, and there's a hole there just big enough for a desperate junkie to squeeze through. I asked Brian and Rebecca if I should call the cops again to let them know that I found this, and my boss said, "There's still 2 cop cars in the parking lot." So I went down to tell them, and the female cop kinda rolled her eyes, but the young guy said, "I'll come check it out." They both came back up, looked in the hole, and found a pillow, blankets, cigarettes, clothes, toothbrushes. This woman had been living in the wall behind my mirror for God knows how long. She had access to me and my room at all times. I know it might be hard to picture. There was a crawl space about 2 feet wide in between the 2 rows of rooms. One of the officers called the original officer to come back and take pictures of this. She explained to him what's going on, and all I hear over the radio is, "No fucking way." He comes back, takes pictures, and is just as mind-blown as the rest of us. Obviously we packed up and left immediately. What's even crazier is she has probably been there a long time. The last time we stayed at this hotel, I would randomly smell cigarette smoke, and I assumed someone was smoking in their bathroom and it was traveling through the vents. But nope, a junkie was smoking just on the other side of my mirror. She had access to other rooms too. The holes in the walls were from a renovation, and the hotel hadn't properly patched and just covered up with mirrors. She could have been hanging out in people's rooms when they were gone. Anyway, this was insane and I'm taking a little time off. Story 11. All I wanted was a place to sleep. I always think I have no experiences appropriate for this sub, but thinking about times I've listened to a gut feeling of foreboding, I do think it once saved my ass, or at least all of my personal belongings. This happened last year, in Taiyuan, China. My husband and I arrived by train around 2 a.m., only to discover that the hotel room we'd booked had been given to someone else and we had nowhere to stay for the night. This was actually not the first time we'd found ourselves on the streets of China with nowhere to stay that winter, funnily enough, so we were a bit stressed but not freaking out. We found a cheap hotel online, planning to stay one night and find somewhere nicer the next day, and took a cab over. It was hard to find, so when we got near, the driver called the hotel. A young guy in a tracksuit came out to the street to bring us up. He seemed pretty normal, if surprisingly energetic for 2 a.m. He took us into a rundown building through an alleyway entrance and we took the elevator up to the 9th floor. The hallways were unfinished, just bare concrete and exposed wiring. We're led through a slight labyrinth of these halls till we get to the hotel. It's one hallway of rooms, 4 in total. I was pretty on board with everything till we got into the room. Then I started getting a bad feeling. I thought I was just being prissy at first, because my primary problem was that there was no sink, just a bed, and a glass room with a squatter and a shower, normal at lower-end hotels in China, but I haven't been to one with no sink. Then I noticed there was a small window by the bed leading into the hallway, with no covering on it. Then, while the guy was harassing my husband to try and wrangle more than the agreed price out of him, I noticed there wasn't even a proper lock on the door. I was really not feeling it at this point, and my gut was telling me we should go. My husband wanted to stay. Remember, it's cold, it's 2 a.m., we've been on a train all day, and we're fucking tired, but I insisted we leave. That's when it got really weird. When we came in, there was no sign of another living soul in the building except us and the young guy. No other guests, no other employees. The place didn't even seem to have a front desk. But when we started walking down the hall, the tracksuit young guy followed us and started begging us to stay. Then, all of a sudden, about 10 more people came out of nowhere, and they were all following us down the hall begging us, some of them yelling and touching us, to stay. I don't think so. So we left and spent the next hour and a half at a 24-hour KFC down the road and ended up spending 3 times the price for a soft bed and some peace of mind. Worth it. Story 12. The folk dancing creeper. I'm from the middle of nowhere, born and raised, which can get awfully boring. In order to stave off boredom in my particular little corner of nowhere, my friends and I often enjoy something called contra dancing, which is basically New England folk dancing, where one pairs off with a different, random partner at each dance. This hobby would bring us to all corners of the area and in contact with lots of interesting, and usually older, people. One night, a friend and I had driven about 40 minutes into the woods to this old townhouse. It's an incredibly scenic little area, even at night, great view of the stars, crickets chirping, people dancing in the tiny town hall. A perfect, hot, summer night with friends and about 60 other, again, mostly old, town folk. I had even made cookies for everyone to enjoy, which was announced at the beginning of the dance and was applauded by everyone there. I had danced maybe 2 dances when an older man in his mid-60s approached me for a dance. This was far from unusual. In fact, most of my dance partners were over 40. I had seen this guy at several contra dances, so he definitely wasn't new. This guy came off kind of creepy though. Most of the older guys struck 18-year-old me as grandfatherly, but some just are uncomfortable to be close to. I refused him, saying I promised my friend a dance. He insisted that I dance the dance after with him. Not wanting to be rude, I agreed, trying to be as perky as possible so he didn't know he was making me uncomfortable. "You look so beautiful tonight," was the first thing out of his mouth when we paired up for the dance. I kind of just smiled and nodded. I didn't want to be encouraging. He was sweaty, had a walrus mustache, and was bald except for a crown of gray hair. The dance was a particularly extravagant one, with a move called a gypsy when the partners stare into each other's eyes while circling around each other into a swing. He started making remarks under his breath during this move, such as, "Get over here," and "Can get away from me," while pulling me closer. Gross, but nothing too bad. "I heard you made the cookies." They were delicious. I'll have to get the recipe out of you, or just make you my wife. Then I'd have them all to myself. I almost stopped the dance to get the fuck away from him, but I just shut down and refused eye contact and conversation. I was sufficiently grossed out, but it was nothing too bad. I pulled my friend aside after and told her about him, and then enjoyed the rest of my night. After summer dances, the young people often drive down to a small pond and swim to get rid of the sweat and grossness of the dance. Skinny dipping is encouraged, as this spot is really in the middle of nowhere, no houses around, and an absolutely amazing view of the stars. My friend and I spent about 20 minutes hanging out in the water, with people slowly leaving, until we were the only ones left. That's what I thought, at least. Until I saw a figure standing at the bank of the pond staring out at us. I didn't call out, assuming it was one of our friends. I swam closer, starting to get out of the water. It wasn't until I was actually fully out of the water, clothed only in a t-shirt and underwear, that I recognized the old man from before. I lurched from fear and wrongness I felt in that moment I will never forget. I have never seen anyone above the age of 25 go down to the pond with us, and he was fully clothed and not there for a swim. He also wasn't saying anything. "Shannon, we have to go now." I yelled back at her. The pond bank was narrow and it was hard to scramble around him. I was pretending I couldn't see him, that he wasn't there, or that I didn't care he was there. Shannon was about 20 feet behind me when he turned to follow me back to the cars. The rocks were painful to walk on and made it hard to move quickly. "I heard you guys were coming down here," he said. At this point Shannon was just coming near him. She did not recognize him from earlier stories, and wasn't reacting to the creepiness as strongly as I was. "Huh, yeah, sometimes we cool off down here," Shannon replied. He got between me and her, blocking her from the car. "You know, you and your friend look like sisters. I heard she made the cookies. Do you cook as well as her? I'd love a pair of you at home." This is when the situation really hits Shannon. We're alone with this guy who's apparently followed us to the middle of nowhere with unknown intentions. "It was nice talking to you, but we have to go." Come on, Shannon." I was practically running to the car, throwing the words over my shoulder. He put a hand on Shannon's bare shoulder, which spurred her after me. "Come on, you two, I'm just trying to have some fun." I was already in reverse by the time Shannon got in the car with me. We tore out of the dirt road at about 50 miles per hour and hit pavement at around 70. I almost puked when I saw headlights turn out from the road, following us. Since I was about 40 minutes from home through all back roads, I took a gamble and headed towards the nearest gas station, followed the whole way. We stopped at the station, right in front of those huge windows in front. He slowed down, looked at us, and then sped away. I haven't seen him at a contra dance since, which is the scariest thing to me, as he used to be a regular. In my experience, contra dancers are a loyal bunch, but this guy just sort of drifted in for a couple months and disappeared just as quickly. Still makes me uncomfortable to think about. Story 13. In the middle of the woods. My friends and I decided to go camping one spring break. We had planned a week in advance, and as the day got closer, the weather got worse. It was cold and gray, unheard of for Arkansas. The night finally came along with yet another cold front. It was in the 30s, but we had dressed warm and stocked up on whiskey and beer. The plan was to hit a spot my buddy knew, which was barely accessible with his 4x4. We wanted to really camp, none of those designated sites for families and seniors in RVs. So we aimed away from civilization, which was only made up by a single stoplight and a couple hundred people, and drove into the woods. After 30 minutes of bone-rattling dips across dry creek beds and detours around trees, it started to rain. By the time we found camp, it had turned into hail. The spot was marked by an ancient dirt road a few hundred feet long and the rotting carcass of a VW bug. That night was spent passing a bottle around, hoping we'd figure out the tents before we were too drunk. Eventually we did and managed to start a fire with diesel. At this point the hail had stopped, the empty whiskey bottle lay broken in the fire, and we had a decent pile of empties growing. We drank, we played cards, we passed out in our tents. The next morning I gradually regained consciousness to the sound of something large being dragged past my tent. It was what looked to have once been a station wagon, stripped and rust-covered, dragging the VW with a chain. The VW had been there for so long that the floor had rotted out and roots had tied it to the forest floor. They lay scattered in the wake of the wagon. A woman was driving, a man beside her, and 3 shirtless kids sat in the back where there used to be seats. The man stared out the window away from us the entire time. The children had dirt smeared on their faces which illuminated their glassy 1,000-yard stares. It's the look of crushing poverty, and you've probably only seen it in pictures. It exists in war-torn countries, the projects in inner cities, and the deep south. So deep that the old gas station back in town, a place you'd probably jokingly hum the Deliverance theme, that was the city to these people. She spoke in a deep nicotine and whiskey-soaked drawl. Y'all come from the city to do some camping? Well, reckon that's fine, long as ya ain't doing no drugs. Y'all ain't doing drugs, are ya? We weren't. Just drinking then? Hell, I like a drink now and again my darn self. That's fine, that's just fine. Wanna know how I knowed y'all was here? Seen them black helicopters flying around? Some boys that work for me see. This is my land and they told me. Can't be too careful, I figured I'd best check it out. She started laughing. Mucus bubbled up to wet her dry cackle. The man stared out at nothing. One of the children put both hands on the window and gazed through us. His mouth hung open and spit cut a line through the filth on the glass. He was probably 10 years old. Y'all know Bethany? We didn't. Everyone knows old Beth. Y'all go to church. I lied. Good, ain't got time for those that don't fear God. Why don't come on to church tomorrow? You can meet Bethany. It's just over that hill up there, can't miss it. Boy, she'd sure like to meet y'all. They all would. We assured her we would. She drove away into the trees, slowly dragging the VW. As soon as she left, we all looked at each other and started laughing. It was just nerves, there wasn't anything funny about it. We all have the remnants of a primitive warning system for danger. It's been eroded by living safe and civilized, but every once in a while it goes off and you obey it without question. Something is wrong. It started before she spoke, when I looked into her eyes. Something is wrong. Kids, the man, her laugh. Something is wrong. Eventually we hiked up the hill, you could see for a mile. There was nothing. No buildings, no clearings, just forest. We cut our trip short, packed up and left before noon. Story 14. Someone memorized the family knock. My friend Lily has a cabin on a lake in WA. And one summer she brought me and her cousin Evan. It had been a great couple of days, and on the last night, like we had the past few nights, we went fishing at the lake, about a 5-minute walk from her cabin. It was about 7 p.m. and the fishing was perfect at that hour. To get to the beach, you had to walk through a small section of woods. There was a trail in the middle that during the day was occupied by women jogging with strollers and kids running to another nearby beach. Our beach was more secluded and there was no trail to get there. The hill down was steep and slippery, and on the way back it took climbing on all fours to get to the top. We stayed at that beach until about 8:30, just sitting in the dark, relaxing. We were good kids and mostly just sat on a log chatting. It was one of those weird situations where suddenly you look around, and you realize that it's gotten dark. I told Lily and Evan that we should probably get home. They agreed and we packed up our gear. This was the latest that we had stayed out at the beach, so to my overactive and scary movie-powered imagination, I was a little scared. We calmly and silently for some reason, walked up the hill. I told them that it was pretty creepy here at night, and then Evan made it 10 times worse. He told us a story about these mountain men who had been around in the 60s and were basically these men who lived in the woods and were in some sort of cult. He said that they had murdered people all over the area for their cult and that some were still around. Internally, I was hysterical and terrified. But externally, I basically told Evan to shut up and to stop trying to scare us. As we started to cross the trail, Evan looked to our right for some reason. He stopped dead in his tracks and looked scared. Lily told him to stop being stupid and the two of us started to climb the steepest part, all 4 climbing parts, of the hill. Evan grabbed us both by the arm very forcefully and made us look where he was looking. At first, I couldn't see anything and I just wanted to get home. But then my eyes adjusted and I saw a large man, I'm assuming it was a man because of the shape, stumbling toward us pretty slowly. Who knows what his intentions were, But being kids, we freaked out and scrambled up the hill as fast as we could. We all turned around at some point and saw that the dude was running, well, stumbling quicker, toward us while we climbed. He got pretty close to us until we finally got over the hill and sprinted across the road to the cabin. It sounds fairly innocent, but we all had a deep feeling of dread when we saw him on that trail. I didn't feel like he had good intentions. Once we got to the cabin, we threw our gear on the porch and ran to the front door, and it was locked. There was a secret knock that her family had that showed that the person at the door was a member of the family or a friend. It was a fairly complicated rhythm, and both Lily and Evan banged on the door to the family knock. I just looked around trying to see if the creep had followed us, but saw nothing. We were let in and in a panic told the adults the whole story. They said it was probably just some guy who we probably made feel bad. We disagreed but felt safe in the locked cabin with grown-ups. The cabin had a walkout basement, basically like a lower story, not a creepy basement. It had a door and windows, where Lily and I slept on bunk beds. We went down to get into pajamas. After about 5 minutes of calming down together, we heard the family knock. I thought it was Evan trying to come in from the stairway door. So I said, "Come in." No response. It happened again, but this time, we realized where it was coming from. The window outside. Lily and I turned completely white and stared at each other with that horrible feeling of terror in your stomach. It happened again, but a little more frantically. We both ran to the stairway door and booked it up to the living room where Lily's family and Evan were. We told them all what we had heard through panicked tears, and Evan went downstairs to listen. He said it was definitely the knock. While Lily's uncle, older brother, and older cousin all gathered flashlights to go look outside, we heard it again, but on the front door. Everyone looked at the door and huddled together. It happened once or twice more, and Lily's uncle finally decided to call the police. He said, "I'm not sure what their intentions are, but there is someone trying to get into my cabin." The knocking went on for another 2 minutes or so, and finally it stopped. 5 minutes after the call, the police showed up with a comforting loud pounding and "Police!" yell through the door. To make sure, Lily's uncle looked outside a window and saw other police searching around for the creeper. The policeman asked us 3 kids what had happened in the woods, and we told him the whole thing. The police never found anyone, but those banging knocks on the door will stick with me forever. The policeman said that it was probably just some guy who was twisted and just wanted to freak some kids out. But what creeped me out the most was the fact that that person had memorized the complicated family knock. All 3 of us slept on the floor together. To the creepy man who really wanted into our cabin, let's not meet.